All right, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Kenai commencement. Welcome to Kenai. So my name is Shannon Martin. I'm the Executive Director of the Kenai River Sportfishing Association, or CRISA, as many of us call it. We were formed in 1984, and we've become Alaska's largest sport fishing organization. We have a dedicated team of board of directors. We have passionate staff, and we're over 4,000 members strong. We all care deeply about our fishing opportunities and fish habitat. We advocate and fight for personal use and sport fish access, healthy fish habitat, and the return of Alaska's king salmon. Throughout the decades, and with many of our partnerships, such as the John Whitewaters, CRISA has invested millions of dollars to restore habitat, install fishing access, infrastructure, boat launches, and provide representation in the regulatory process, and much, much more. Today, I'm so grateful to be co-hosting this year's policy forum with our partners at the Western Caucus Foundation. The forum at its core purpose is to bridge gaps between our elected officials and our policymakers with the stakeholders. So thank you all for coming today. Thank you to our panelists. And please join me in welcoming Daryl Henry, Executive Director of the Western Caucus Foundation.
Happy to be here. Welcome all of you, those with the foundation, stakeholder staff, and members, as well as local guests and Alaska people on the caucus, on the Kenai Classic. One quick note, make sure your phone's on silent, and for those with us that have come to new judges, Avery will hand them out before we go to the bus on the way out. It's over. We are thrilled to be here on the Kenai. We've been looking to come back to Alaska as far as Western Caucus goes for a few years. And it was presented to me by the Alaska delegation that maybe we should partner with CRISA and do some salmon fishing on the Kenai. And I thought, what a great way to do it. What a great experience for the folks of the Western Caucus to do. And the question people are like, what is the caucus? What is the Western Caucus? Where is it? How does this all fit together? So I run what's called the Western Caucus Foundation. It's a nonprofit organization that works directly with the House and Senate Western Caucuses. I like to say we extend the field to the Western Caucus. We're an education and communications organization, so we like to promote what the Western Caucus is doing, promote the issues and policies that the Western Caucus supports, both the House and the Senate members. On the Senate side, we have 29 members from Western Mississippi, chaired by Senator Cynthia Lummis of Wyoming, and vice chaired by Dan Sullivan here in Alaska. On the House side, it's about 90 members of the House of Representatives, all across the country. We don't have a geographic divide on the House side. So we have folks from Alaska all the way to New York, who's a member of the caucus, but they all come together because they believe in the core issues of the Western Caucus. And I did basically it's kind of the Western Caucus community. So that's what we do. We're kind of as a foundation interface. We help bridge the gap from stakeholders and folks with members and staff. We put on trips like this throughout the year, all over the country. It's called our cultural exchange program, where we meet people from different parts of the country to different parts of Western and rural America to get an understanding of what life is like on the ground, how these policies that we legislate in Washington affect folks in the district, as well as taking back to Washington what we learn here and apply them to the legislation that's going on in Washington, D.C. to better represent Western and rural American values. So that's a little bit about what we do. There's a lot out there. Please, if you're not with us, subscribe to our social media accounts, both Congressional Western Caucus, Senate Western Caucus, and the Western Caucus Foundation, to keep tabs on what we're doing in Washington, fighting for Western and rural America. So with that, I want to introduce our House Chairwoman, Celeste Malloy of Utah. And as I say, when I first met Ms. Malloy, she was coming to our events as a policy person for local government, and she's worked her way up and is now, I'm so excited to have her as our Congressional Western Caucus Chair, Celeste Malloy of Utah. Thanks.
I'm really excited to be here. This is my second trip to Alaska. The first one was a year ago with the House Natural Resources Committee. And I kept telling everyone that I would definitely be back. So I'm glad I'm here a year later with the Western Caucus, again, talking about issues that matter to Alaskans. I'm the chair of the Congressional Western Caucus, and unlike the foundation, we do the policy side. And so our missions support each other. And if you're having a good time at this event, you should join us in Vegas in December, because that's where we talk about what we're going to do policy-wise for the next Congress. So the first exposure I had to Western Caucus, I was a deputy county attorney in Southern Utah during public lands law. I also worked at the same time for the Utah Association of Counties doing public lands policy. And it felt like we were in the wilderness trying to change these big issues all by ourselves. And the federal government was far away, and it's hard to get the audience or the attention to get anything fixed. And I went to the Western Caucus policy meeting in Vegas in December, and all of these members of Congress that I had always seen on TV and never thought I would meet, and administration officials and former members and former administration officials were sitting around having these really serious, substantive conversations about what we should be doing with land and minerals and water and wild horses, and some issues that were of nationwide importance and some that were fairly regional, and I was hooked. I have been a big fan of Western Caucus ever since. I attended as a staffer, and now I am attending as a member and as the chair. And so I just hope that any of you who are new to Western Caucus will see that what we're doing here in Alaska is getting on the ground experience, gathering data, getting a feel for the issues, getting to know people who are dealing with the issues every day, so that we can make better policy decisions in Washington, D.C. Because the people on the ground dealing with resource issues shouldn't feel like you're out in the wilderness and have no access to what's happening in Washington. So we're really focused in Western Caucus on rural issues and natural resources issues. Obviously, Alaska makes sense. There's a whole lot of rural here and a whole lot of natural resources. But I want to introduce some of my colleagues who are here so you can get a feel for how universal this actually is. So those of you whose names I'm about to say, if you would just stand up and wave, I really appreciate it. Dr. Babbitt from Texas isn't here yet. He's joining us later today. Ramon Estes from Kansas is here with his family. Jeff Burton from Colorado. Derek Mahmood from Illinois. Nicole Caucus from New York. Dan Greenhouse from Washington, who's also a past chair. Pete Stauber from Minnesota. And then we also have two former members of Congress who are former members of the Western Caucus here. Debbie Lesko from Arizona, who's now a county supervisor. And Matt Harold, who's now at the USDA. And Senator Murkowski's around here somewhere. I don't know if she's in the room right now, but she's here. And we have a whole bunch of officials from the administration. So these are the kind of things that don't happen very often. We have this many members of Congress outside of Washington, D.C., and in the same place and focused on the same issues with administration officials, and even having people from the House and from the Senate here at the same time. I hope that by the time we're done, you'll see that we are actually effective at solving some of these problems and not just here because it's beautiful in Alaska during the summer and because everybody wants to go fishing. Those things are great. But hopefully we can do all those things and then also tackle some of the policy issues and the rural issues and help with the natural resources concerns in this state, but also other states having these concerns. So we've got people, members of Congress here from New York and Illinois, and some of the states that you probably expect to see represented at something called the Western Caucus. And there are not very many executive caucuses in Congress. There are actually only 5 on the House side. This is one of 6 on the House side. This is one of them. And it puts us in a unique position to get members really focused on policy areas and policy issues. So thank you for having us here in Alaska. I hope you all have a good time, and I am going to yield the floor so that the panel can get started.
so now it's time for our first gathering. This is conversation on sports fishing for the Alaska delegation. Coming out here will be Joe Bellish to moderate, former Chief Staff for Jan Sullivan, and former member for Chris. We'll have Senator Lisa Murkowski, Western Caucus member, Larry Burton, Chief of Staff to Senator Dan Sullivan, our Vice Chair, as well as Congressman Nick Page. So I'll let you know.
Well, good afternoon to all of those who are traveling here from out of town, out of state. Welcome to the Kenai, welcome to Alaska. It's fantastic to see all of you. As a former chief, I can't imagine getting this many people to come on a staff bill. So thank you to Daryl and the Western Caucus Foundation for putting this extraordinary opportunity together. Everybody up here is super proud of our state and the role that we can all play in supporting the recreational opportunities for our fisheries here in Alaska. Those fisheries are fundamental to Alaska's identity, economy, and way of life. For generations, Alaskans have relied on our waters for subsistence, recreation, tourism, and economic opportunity. For many communities, recreational and subsistence fishing aren't simply activities, they are part of what makes Alaska home. Yet many of the decisions that affect those opportunities are made at the federal level, often thousands of miles away. Federal agencies, the North Pacific Fishery Management Council, and Congress have significant influence over access, allocation, habitat, bycatch, conservation, and the management of our fisheries. For recreational and subsistence users, the question isn't simply how many fish are in the water, it's whether Alaskans have a meaningful opportunity to access and benefit from those fish, and whether federal policy recognizes the tremendous economic, cultural, and conservation value of these fisheries. Today, we'd like to talk a little bit about how Alaska's
question about how we make sure that Alaska's voices are heard in the federal decision-making process. We got to show up. We have to be present. We have to comment when comments are open before the Fisheries Management Councils. We have to make sure that we have people who are knowledgeable in these positions to carry that voice up. But we also need to make sure that we're making decisions, not based on our gut and what I might want, but on sound science and good fisheries management. So you get tired of saying it all comes back to the science, but that's what we spend a lot of our time trying to do, is make sure that we have good, sound science to allow us to manage well. And that benefits all Alaskans and all of our fisheries.
I think you're absolutely right, Senator. Data-driven decision-making is paramount when you're going into a committee and you're trying to make an argument or a case for legislation or regulation. And making sure that we invest in good science and good data is a big part of making sure that Alaskans are heard in a place like Washington, D.C. It's also about being on the right committees. Being on the House Natural Resources Committee, that's been a long-standing assignment for Alaska's sole member in the United States House. I'm proud to be on that committee. And it provides us with an opportunity to weigh in on the Committee of Jurisdiction where these decisions are going to be made. The delegation that came before us pioneered so much of the structure that we have to manage our fisheries in Alaska. They created the North Pacific Fishery Management Council through Magnuson-Stevens Act, where Stevens, being our senator for so long, worked together with Don Young to make sure that we had a forum to have these discussions among the different user groups that matter here in state when it comes to these fisheries, because we share these fisheries. For folks that are from Alaska that are here visiting, we share these fisheries among all users, whether they're commercial, sport, whether they are subsistence users. whether those users tend to be urban or rural. And so it's very important that we have a forum in the North Pacific Fishery Management Council that allows us to let the science lead.
It's an honor to be here with a senior senator from Alaska and the congressman for all Alaska, and all of you. Thanks for making time to be here and learn about our great state. We think about fish every day at Senator Sullivan's office. Get up in the morning, think about fish, go to bed thinking about fish. He sits on the Commerce Committee, which has jurisdiction over fisheries issues. One area that he tries to get people to do is to come to Washington, D.C., and he's hosted multiple roundtables with Alaska fisheries leaders to make sure the Secretary of Commerce and NIMS and no administrator have a real feel for what the issues are in our state. Senator Sullivan and Senator Murkowski both take the confirmation process very, very seriously. We make them do their homework. I think when Commerce secretaries find their job, they realize that half of their portfolio relates to fish, and it's kind of a surprise. I think they're going to be doing infrastructure and technology and chips and all those things. But fisheries is really fundamental to the country, and both senators make sure that they do their homework. One of the things that Senator Sullivan does is he does two things in the confirmation process. Number one, he gets them to commit to come to Alaska to make sure that they see the scope and scale of our state and really gets a feel for the issues, the fisheries issues in our state. Secondly, he gets their mobile telephone number so that when we do have fisheries issues, he doesn't have to go through staff. He can go right to the secretary, or right to the administrators to have a direct conversation. We host, conversations with a lot of different perspectives. Recently, we had Captain Bob from Seward and David Bays, who's actually been prolific in social media, to talk about some of the issues facing the fisheries sector. And from that, we try to get meetings with Democrat and Republican staff so that the technical details can be sort of understood. And as Senator Murkowski and Congressman Begich mentioned, data is really, really important so that policymakers can make sound decisions.
Well, I'd like to build on a comment made by Senator Murkowski with regard to statehood and the quest to gain greater control over our fisheries here in Alaska as Alaskans. And that jurisdiction that we want at statehood gets us control of a lot of the in-river fisheries management issues and even the near shore. But it's so often we find that issues affecting our rivers are actually happening out in the ocean, in the blue water. And it is the North Pacific Fishery Management Council that makes so many of the decisions affecting the user groups, the equipment, the size of boats, the type of gear they run. And it's their responsibility to make sure that activity is done in a way that doesn't do any harm to our ecology, our habitat, and ultimately the fish stocks. So when the council is making decisions that have an impact on our recreation and subsistence resource users, how do you make sure that not only they have a voice in the process, but that everyday Alaskans are being heard? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, it really does come down to the showing up part of the job. Because we can make sure that people know that, look, there's public comment out there, but if you're not motivated to get out and participate in that, then your voice is not going to be heard. And that's hard, because most everybody has another day job that they're focusing on. But again, when you think about how key these fisheries are to everyday Alaskans, the Alaskan who may be a teacher working in Anchorage, but who's able to fill his freezer because he comes down and enjoys, the one weekend a summer where he's able to dip net and basically make it through the rest of the winter. He cares about this. So how do we get those folks engaged and commenting? So this is part of what your delegation actually can help with, is making sure that we're pushing on that level of engagement. But take it back a little bit to what both the congressman and Larry have said about our role as a federal delegation, working to make sure that this remains a priority, so that the Secretary of Commerce, when he or she is nominating people for these councils that are making these decisions, that they know how important these positions are. This is not just kind of a throwaway spot. These are significant, important decisions. Making sure that the governor has a good slate of Alaskans who are knowledgeable, committed, and willing to engage in these levels. I think so much of it comes down to making sure that it is well understood how significantly important this is to Alaskans and Alaskans' lifestyles. So we have things that we can control, which is pushing people to participate. And then we have some other things that are just a little bit harder. I'm going to end my comments by just acknowledging the brutal fact that there is nothing more political in Alaska than fish. Is that a true statement?
Very true.
So I think you're absolutely right. I think participation from the grassroots level is critically important. The North Pacific Fishery Management Council needs to hear from the various user groups, but I think there are opportunities for improvement on the North Pacific Fishery Management Council composition. Alaska actually has the ability to appoint the majority. We appoint the majority of the council membership, and so making sure that those members that we appoint represent each user group is important in my view. And that's why I put forward the North Pacific Fishery Management Council Representation Enhancement Act. And what this would do is create specific designated seats for the user groups, including the recreational user group, the sport fishing industry. Making sure that there's a designated seat for each user group is really important in my view, because then everyone within that group knows that there's a point person they can go to that is a subject matter expert in their specific use, whether that's urban subsistence, rural subsistence, recreation, or commercial, and I'm talking about small commercial. I think it's important. And so we're working on advancing that bill through the Congress as a way, hopefully, to provide a greater voice for the user groups that span across the state.
So I would say that the council is actually meant to be sort of an open, stakeholder-driven process, but it's far from perfect, as we all know. It can always be improved. And so that's one of the reasons when Senator Sullivan introduced his Bycatch Reduction Act, it was meant to strengthen the North Pacific Fishery Management Council process by improving transparency, increasing some accountability, and expanding opportunities for public participation. There's a section in there, Section 4. There are basically 3 elements there that I think are worth looking at. One is really dealing with the transparency about reporting and publishing meetings so that people know more about it and that they're more available for people. Secondly, there's a piece in there about extending the comment period so people have more of an opportunity to have their say. And third, there's a piece in there about strengthening conflict of interest rules. I think there's some concerns about that, and that was an effort to address that concern.
I always forget how good your staff are to prepare you guys to start answering questions I haven't asked yet. You guys know who you are out there, dang it. So I'll speak maybe to one thing that in the context of the council and some of the things that you guys are looking at, contemplating changes in federal policy, commercial fishing has been a cornerstone of Alaska's economy, but recreational fishing is a major economic driver here. And subsistence fishing is fundamental to communities, individuals that have been here for millennia. Do you believe that the federal fisheries policy today adequately recognizes the economic, cultural, and conservation value of these two sectors in the current framework?
No, I don't think that they adequately or appropriately understand not only the economic value, but maybe it's easier to identify the economic value because you can point to that, but I don't think it's well understood the cultural value that whether it's sport or subsistence fishery brings to Alaskans. Again, we might be able to quantify what it means, the value of subsistence fishery, when you're able to say, well, this means that I don't have to buy hamburger to feed my family because I'm able to feed them fish. And so the value, monetary value can be accounted for, but there is more than just the dollars that are assigned to it. It is, again, very much a part of a cultural identity to teach your children and your grandchildren how to cut fish, how to dry fish, how to prepare for it, how to care for the resource itself. And so I don't think that is well understood, and I don't think that it is adequately or appropriately accounted for in federal fisheries policy. We have work to do there.
I agree with that. And I think one of the challenges that we see is a portion of the fisheries industry get allocated a particular bycatch threshold. And then we see in the same river systems that people are restricted from catching those species at all. And to me, that is representative of an imbalance across the industry when you've got big user group that's able to catch a certain number of kings, and no one can catch a king outside of them in Kenai. And so to me, I think that is illustrative of the fact that there is an imbalance. I agree that there needs to be more done for people to understand the importance of, particularly in rural Alaska, having predictable, abundant fisheries in river. You got, for folks, again, if you're not from Alaska, let me just tell you, we have people that live in exceptionally remote communities. In the lower 48, when we talk about rural, we're talking about a long drive. In Alaska, we're talking about a long boat ride or a flight because there are no roads. And so you think about when you fly food into these communities, it's a lot of money. Some of these communities, I'm talking, you're flying it in a very small plane. This is not a commercial aircraft. And so you're paying exceptionally elevated rates in communities that don't necessarily have a lot of economic opportunity to begin with. And it chases people out of the communities they grew up in. They're forced to go somewhere else because they can't afford to live in their communities. And so fish has been an answer to the subsistence question for these people for thousands of years. And that's changing right now. We need to make sure we're doing everything we can to protect that, not just that lifestyle, but the ability for those families to stay in the communities they grew up in.
I would agree with both Senator Murkowski and Congressman Begich. The only thing I would add is just to recognize, I think Carrie Moriarty's here in the audience. It's important to talk about the President's Day 1 in Leashing Alaska executive order, where actually directed the Interior Department to direct all the bureaus of the department to consider first the Alaska cultural significance of hunting and fishing. Secondly, to conduct a meaningful consultation with the state fish and wildlife management agencies prior to enacting management plans. And third, to the greatest extent possible, that hunting and fishing opportunities on federal lands are consistent with similar opportunities in state lands. Very important executive order. The other thing that I was reminded by my colleagues back in DC is that we passed the Fishes Act, which among other things formalizes subsistence and recreational fisheries in the federal fish disaster process.
So I'm going to pivot to the question of access, and just for a couple of moments, I'll exercise a little bit of discretion here on the moderator's part to point out that many people who traveled here with the foundation are going to get to experience firsthand the world-class, and I mean world-class, fishing opportunity that the Kenai River presents all of us here in Alaska almost every day, every year. And that's an incredible system. We have multiple other systems in Alaska that are not nearly as accessible. And it really doesn't do us any good to manage these fisheries and have healthy fisheries if Alaskans can't access them. So what role should the federal government play in protecting and expanding recreational fishing access on federal lands and waters? And Senator, I'll just point out that everybody traveled by bus today on a federal highway through a refuge. And it wasn't a gravel road connecting
11
to an
miles,
airport.
yeah. Access has long been Alaskans' challenge. We do not lack for any resource. Some might say we lack sometimes a little bit of sunshine, but we get enough of it. We're good with that. But we lack the access to the resources, and certainly when it comes to our fisheries as well. So yes, very fortunate to be here in South Central, where Alaskans can access not only the Kenai River, but we've got the Kasilof, we've got Deep Creek down there. You can go charter out of Seward or out of Homer. The access is really unparalleled down here, but in many other parts of the state, that's challenged. But it's more than just physical access, being able to get there by transportation. It's also when the federal government or the government acts as the gatekeeper saying, no, off limits here. And my view is, it goes to the statement that Larry just read about the Alaska executive order that lands should be made available for hunting and fishing. And our public lands, we have more public lands than any other state. This view that we should be open unless specifically closed. So how we ensure that for the most part, there is continued access. We get the management, we accept and actually welcome that, because at the end of the day, we can talk about access, but if we don't have fish, we have nothing to access, right? So it does come down to making sure that we have abundance of our species for all of our users. And that's a hard one, because there's more and more Alaskans, and there are more and more who are coming to Alaska to also be able to access the resource. So how we are able to best manage for sport and recreation, for subsistence, for commercial, for all users, this is Alaska's ultimate challenge, and this is where I think we need to take the view that the resource needs to be available to serve the people that are here, and how we allow for that through our government regulatory processes. This is our challenge, but you defer to yes before to no.
So in Alaska, you all heard of AOC. In Alaska, AOC means something different. It's the Alaska Outdoor Council. And the Alaska Outdoor Council, which I'm a member, there's about 40,000 members in Alaska. One of their core tenets is public access to public lands. And I think that's a theme that you'll find across political boundaries, across regions in Alaska. People believe in public access, generally speaking, to public lands and resources. And so access goes hand in hand with resources. If you don't have access, to the senator's point, you don't really have a resource, because you're not going to be able to access it, you're not going to be able to do anything with it. One of the great things about the Kenai River Sportfishing Association, or CURSA as we call it, is that they've done things to enhance not just access, but the river environment, right? And so there's been, in the past, before we had certain knowledge, there were certain practices that happened on river systems, and it destroyed habitat that we weren't aware of at that time. And so I think it's important, because we've got public-private partnerships here in Alaska that work very well to help restore the habitat, so that when you do get the access, the fish have access too. spawning grounds and the ability to be productive. So, look, access is crucially important. We're going to do everything we can to support it. A big part of that is infrastructure support, and that's something that the federal delegation for Alaska has been harping on in DC for many years. And folks down south are very tired of hearing us remind them that we're 2.5 times the size of Texas, but we have the size of the population of the Dallas suburbs. So there's a lot of infrastructure investment that continues to be necessary to open up more lands in Alaska.
Well, to our friends from the Western Caucus who are here, if you learn nothing else on your trip, I hope you learn about access and the importance of multiple use. And so I kind of want to do a mic drop on what we just heard from our Alaska delegation.
All right, last prompt from me. You can fit in whatever you want. You're all pros at pivoting. But 10 years from now, what would a federal fisheries management system look like that Alaskans, particularly our recreational and subsistence communities, would consider fair, transparent, and capable of protecting the fishing opportunities for future generations of life?
So this is probably the hardest question of all, because what I may consider to be fair may not be viewed as fair to the commercial fishing family from Cordova or from the subsistence user on the upper Yukon. And I take it back to sustainable management that allows for access by all user groups in a way and a manner that has eliminated and I don't know if elimination is possible, but reduced the friction and the inherent tension that comes within our various fisheries sectors. Reduces the tensions so that we are in that place that each of us feels that I might not have 100% of what I would want, but I have enough. I have enough for my family and I have enough from the perspective of being able to practice a subsistence lifestyle. I have enough to ensure that my small coastal community that thrives on a well-maintained and managed fishery, that we're not only surviving, but that we're able to thrive with the resource because we have worked together with shared interests, which is to ensure that we do have an abundance within a carefully regulated and managed fisheries. And that may be a dream that we're ever able to go back to that place, but I think it should be a goal of ours, because I can't imagine our state as a place where, as a river user, my family is not able to provide for themselves, or that as a small southeastern coastal community that you literally might disappear with no resource returning to allow for your community to have a little bit of a cold storage there so you can see fish deliveries. That's a state that I'm not prepared to accept. So everything that your delegation does, from the authorizing side that Senator Sullivan works so hard on within Commerce, to where I sit on the Appropriations Committee, on the Commerce, Justice, Science Appropriations, the funds that we direct to data, research, everything from our new bill with eDNA, everything that we can do to be smarter and sounder and wiser in understanding our fisheries. I am here to help push the funding to make that happen. because that's going to benefit all of us. So you're going to have a delegation going forward, and I don't care. I'm the only one that is not in cycle right now, and I think I can honestly and optimistically say you will never have a federal delegation in Washington, D.C. that does not prioritize our fisheries. And if they're smart, they will prioritize the fisheries for all Alaskans to enjoy the benefit and the bounty.
So, I think the senator touched on the watchword, and it's abundance. What's the vision for our fisheries in 10 years? It's restored abundance. And we want to make sure that there's enough fish for everybody. Now, there's always going to be a time when there's going to be conflict. There is tension because, unlike many things in life, this is a fixed pie resource. But we can expand the pie. We can do better at making sure that there are more fish in the ocean and the river systems, so that people have what they need and maybe a little bit more than they need. That's my vision. And when you're managing a fishery, it's supply-demand economics, right, that come into play. What can we do that's going to improve the supply of this resource for all of our user groups? And then also, what can we do, and we do a lot in Washington, to increase the demand for Alaska seafood? We produce 60% of the nation's domestically caught seafood in Alaska. One of the frustrating things that we see down south is that there's not clear labeling. This is something that we talk a lot about in the office. We'll probably have some legislation on here soon. It's important as we talk about transparency for the consumer, for that end-stage consumer of a product, to know where their product came from. And, I really believe we need to make sure that the labeling is clear. It's Alaskan and it's wild caught, right? Very important. And I think we give more transparency to the consumer. We'll have a better price for our fish. We'll do a lot to sustain our fisheries. And but I think we got to look at it from a supply and demand perspective, and that'll get us to a point of abundance.
Well, we certainly don't have all the answers, but we certainly want to try the best we can to make a better future. Abundance was touched on. I want to add healthy oceans. Abundance and healthy oceans are really important. I do want to mention Senator Sullivan's Save Our Seas Act and Save Our Seas 2.0, which is exactly designed to do that. It's the most comprehensive ocean cleanup bill, I think, in the history of the country, bills in the history of the country. Through the effort of the Bycatch Reduction Act, again, that's trying to make improvements in the process so people feel included in all dimensions of the fisheries ecosystem. But to the future, Joe, ultimately a council that includes all users where stakeholders are able to meaningfully contribute, but importantly, to feel that they have a voice in the decision-making process should be the goal. So thanks, Joe, for having me. Appreciate it.
All right, well, I want to make sure and thank on behalf of Kenai River Sportfish Association. I'm co-chair of the Kenai Classic event. The support we get from the delegation for this amazing resource, this amazing river, is second to none. Your continued advocacy for sound management and conservation is appreciated, and hope everybody catches a big one tomorrow. And chances are it probably will be the biggest fish you've caught in your life on a rod and reel. So I think we are done with this panel, and I will turn it over to Shannon Martin from Carissa, I believe. No, back to Daryl. There we go.
Alaska's doing what they have these folks. Also want to point out that Page is our vice chair of the Western Caucus, is doing a great job of really representing Alaska, but also rural America across the country. We'd like to invite up our federal panel. So we're going to talk healthy fish, healthy habitat, and access to the resources on federal land. So Carol Moriarty, Senior Advisor for Alaska Affairs to the Secretary of the Department of the Interior. Brenda Youngkin, Deputy Assistant Secretary for Lands and Minerals Management. And Emma Koga, Regional 10 Administrator of the U.S. EPA. Thank you all for joining us here. Go to your comments.
Well, good afternoon. As Daryl said, my name is Kara Moriarty, and I have the honor of serving as Secretary Burgum's Senior Advisor for Alaska. For those of you not in Alaska or from Alaska, this position is unique to the Department of the Interior. And some people wonder, well, why does the Secretary have a special Alaska advisor? So just to put it in context, we have 365 million acres in the state of Alaska, and the Department of Interior is the landlord or manager of over 215 million of that 365. So I have arguably, my DOI colleagues can disagree with this, but I think I arguably have one of the best portfolios in the department because I get to work on all things Alaska. So I live here.
And the local knowledge is something that is important both for planning as well as for science and policy implementation. So making sure that we have, this administration has made changes to our NEPA rulemaking, which influences and impacts getting local input. We're working through planning, regulatory changes that will refocus how we get local input, and all of those things help us understand if we are actually using good science and making good policies out of that good science.
So Emma, how about EPA? How do you see EPA ensuring that environmental decisions are scientifically sound while also giving communities, user groups, maybe like the Kenai River Sportfishing Association, some clarity and predictability?
Yeah, thanks. I'll certainly concur with a lot of the points from the Department of Interior and the importance of gold standard science. Some specific things that I'm seeing or have seen over the course of time that I'm also seeing some good decisions at EPA around are the importance of having good data. Right, so folks that are invested in the Kenai River may recall that a number of years back there had been some data that came in suggesting that the Kenai River should be listed as impaired for, I think it was zinc. And that obviously was, a big surprise to a lot of people, right? This is a healthy river and not sort of the same sort of pollution inputs that you might see in a lot of other parts of the country. And it's a big open spaces and protected lands in a number of places. So it's a bit of a surprise. And when the team at DEC went back and looked at the data, they were like, oh, actually, there isn't the appropriate sort of quality assurance around this data that was collected by a third party. And in fact, the data that they were getting was not representative of the water column. They were seeing zinc that was coming off of the boats because of where they were taking the samples from. So at the end of the day, after getting some better data, we were able to say that the Kenai River was not impaired. Maybe it's not a lot of surprise for folks in the area. But today what we're seeing at EPA is really an emphasis on that QA, QC process and the importance of having good data. You're not going to have good science. You're not going to have good decisions or good policy that's based on data that is flawed, right? So having all of those mechanisms in place to ensure that the protocol that were followed when the data was acquired were appropriate, that the measurements are valid. If we're going to be basing regulatory decisions on something, if we're going to be placing requirements on members of the public or on industries, it needs to be based on good, credible data. So we are seeing in the grants arena in particular, if we're spending federal dollars on a grant to collect data around, say, water quality, we want to ensure that that grantee has the appropriate mechanisms in place to ensure the quality of that data so that we can rely on it at a later point in time. Now, that's sometimes a bit more of a burden on the grantee because they don't necessarily have the habits that we're looking for in terms of maintaining that data quality, but we are, I think, being more proactive than has been the case in the past to ensure that data that is collected by third parties is valid and credible so that when we use it for a decision, it is something that we have confidence in.
Well, Emma, I want to turn a little bit more to maybe your old hat a little bit in talking about Alaska and navigability.
Are we gonna let Randy stand up and disagree if he disagrees?
Um,
With whatever my comments are.
Yeah, he now just outed himself, so now we know where he's at in the audience. So, thanks for wearing the teal hat, Randy, so we all know where you are. Awesome. But I think navigability can certainly sound like a very obscure legal, like what does that mean? But obviously here in Alaska, it has some very real implications for who manages the waterways. We may have had a couple of Supreme Court cases in the last decade around navigability, which Alaskan won 9-0 to talk about what does navigability mean and how is it defined specifically in Alaska. But in your view, why does that matter so much in Alaska? And particularly, obviously, we're sitting in front of a picture of this beautiful river we're going to go recreate on tomorrow, one of my favorites of all time. And can you, from your perspective, talk about what, even though it's not your agency, but what progress the administration has made in navigability?
Yes, I think, in my time with the state of Alaska, navigability was an important issue for the state, and I think continues to be, as I understand it, in part because if a water body is navigable, then the state has ownership of the submerged plants and has more prerogative in terms of how that water body is regulated, what rules there are around access. And yeah, John Sturgeon is a bit of a folk hero in Alaska after going through that sort of lengthy legal battle. And a lot of that, I think, comes back to the state having prerogative to make decisions for itself, how to manage resources in the state in a way that makes sense for residents here. And I understand that there's been maybe some news out of the Department of Interior in terms of advancing that conversation that historically I think has been really fraught between the state and the Department of Interior. So it sounds like you guys have made some pretty significant strides on that front in clearing the decks.
Yes, so for the first time since 2016, the Department of the Interior, the BLM, is waiting on the state of Alaska to submit new navigability petitions. So there are 0 pending applications for navigability in front of the department right now. So a huge congratulations and shout out to I almost said the bad act of habit, the Alaska Bureau of Land Management state office here, as well as the state DNR commissioner for that work and getting that long overdue process caught up.
And I think the other place where navigability often comes up in the state is the definition of the term navigable waters under the Clean Water Act, and how that defines whether or not something is solely under the state's jurisdiction or if the federal government has a say in it. So depending on how that is defined, again, I think it comes back to that same question of, does the state have the ability to make management decisions or regulatory decisions that make sense for the state and for the residents here? And I think there's, historically been a lot of frustration with the sense that people thousands of miles away are making decisions. And so I think it's exciting to see shifts in a direction that allow for the state to be able to, again, make decisions that make sense for the residents and for the resources here.
Well, thanks. We know that access isn't just about being able to float down a river. We also know that access depends on infrastructure. And those of us who've been here on the Kenai certainly can appreciate that, as a lot of us went through that federal highway through the refuge to get to a town. I appreciated Joe's comment there. And saw the expansion of the Sterling Highway being undertaken. But Brenda, let's talk a little bit about the Great American Outdoors Act, or GOA. And how does that fit into our administration's broader goal, and why does GOA matter for the anglers in the country?
So President Trump signed the Great American Outdoors Act, or GOA, into effect 6 years ago this month, August of 2020, and made a historic investment into the infrastructure of public lands. As noted earlier, if you can't get to the resource, is it actually a resource? So needing that infrastructure, getting that infrastructure to allow the public to access lands and waters for recreation and other purposes has been critical to the Trump administration since his first administration. Secretary Burgum said 2 weeks ago that GOA is one of the most significant investments in public lands of the 21st century, because access is not just about whether a piece of public land is technically open, but you have to be able to access it to use it. GOA gives us an opportunity to address all of the infrastructure items, whether it's roads, trails, parking lots, accessible locations, fishing docks, all of those things. And so in Alaska in particular, and I've spent the last 25 years living in northwestern Wyoming, just at the gateway of Yellowstone National Park. And I was very incorrectly assumed that when I visited Denali that the access would be sort of comparable to what we see in Yellowstone, and that's what people did when I said that. We got here and I was amazed at how far it was and how little. Yeah, and how little infrastructure there was to get to various places. So I understand firsthand the distances and the scale of how far it takes to get from point A to point B, if you can get from point A to point B. And then having the ability to actually recreate and do things when you get there. I would put a plug in also to encourage the reauthorization of GOA. There's more work to be done. But one great example is right here in Kenai, and funding was used to upgrade and improve Jim's Landing. So I don't know how many folks in the room have been able to go out there. I'm not sure if we're going to get there this trip, but I've heard phenomenal things about it. But one of the things that has done is added to an almost $13.5 million investment into the Kenai Wildlife Refuge. So again, that commitment from this administration. We've also are excited to see reauthorization of the Legacy Restoration Fund, and that has really strong bipartisan momentum, and we look forward to its passage to renew a generational investment in public land infrastructure. As Deputy Secretary McGregor noted in a meeting earlier in a House Natural Resources Committee meeting earlier this summer. And I think the best part about GOA is when you have limited capacity, whether that's financial or people or all of the above, that having that focus on really directing those limited tax dollars to projects that allow the public to get to your public amenities is probably the best way to spend those funds.
Excellent. So as we're closing here, I just want to ask one final question before we get to the final question. So at the end of this administration, what is the one accomplishment affecting recreational fishing or outdoor access that in your mind you could say we made a lasting difference at the EPA and then at DOI?
And there's many things that we can and are doing on that front. I think a lot of it is that, if there is either a water quality standard or a permit that needs to be issued, or some other sort of planning decision, really not feeling like we need to second guess or duplicate the expertise and the decision making that is coming from the capable people at the state agency. A lot of the environmental statutes are set up for the states to be the primary implementers of those programs. We were able to just actually authorize the DEC to take on the RCRA hazardous waste program. So great work being done by the team over there, but it also includes things like the Clean Water Act programs, like the 402 wastewater discharge. So it's one of the things I think that we can and are doing is to really, in some respects, get out of the way. I think we've got really great people at the state agency, and so sort of trusting their judgment and their expertise and letting them fulfill their role in the way that Congress intended. So for me, that's a big one, and I think that there's sort of an agency culture element to that too, right? So that is sort of the policy that I'm implementing in Region 10. But also I think there's a comfort level that will come from the habit of that being able to see that, yeah, these are great scientists, great public servants in the state agencies that know what they're doing. And I think also we have sort of on a national level, a number of regulations that are being updated and changed to comply with Supreme Court decisions or other guidance in science, or correcting for sort of an overreach without adequate science or without adequate legal authority on a number of fronts. And I think that's a key element on the durability front, right? You want to have agency actions and agency regulations really within the scope of what our actual authorities are. I think sometimes people see a problem and want to fix it, right? But maybe Congress hasn't made that our problem to fix. And so really getting those regulations in place that are respectful of those design boards and the agency's authority. And then the durability component comes in when it's something that is not going to get overturned by the courts. And when it's well supported, well reasoned, has been science behind it, then it becomes harder to just arbitrarily change later, right? So doing a good job on those decision points will make the outcome more durable.
Brenda?
Yeah, I think generally the same thing, that durable deregulation, I think, is a powerful combination of words. And when I started this job, I feel like I didn't really know what that meant. And the deeper I get in the weeds, the more I go, oh, this is my job. It is using the delete function heavily. Taking things back to statute and back to that defensibility, I think is very critical. Using navigability as an example. One of the things about durability is it creates consistency. And if you don't know if you're going to have access in 2 years or in 4 years because of an election cycle, that hampers investment in communities, it hampers investment in industry, it hampers all sorts of things. People don't want, whether it's livestock raising or fishing or fuels mitigation, it doesn't matter. If you're not convinced that your investment is going to still be viable in a year or 2 years, people aren't going to do it. And so making sure that we've got an understanding that these have to be solid, they have to be able to persist to make it through the legal challenges that we know are coming is probably the most critical thing I think that we can do. Navigability is a great example, just because when you don't know for a decade or 20 plus years if you're going to have access to the resource, whether it's for transportation or mining or fishing, you're just kind of stuck, you're hamstrung. So I think just making sure that we have that durability and that deregulatory focus to just get back to the basics. That's when I leave here, that's what I'm hoping to have much smaller manuals to read when I'm back on the other side of the table.
Well, excellent. So last lightning round here to close us out. You talked about your favorite fishing memory. Now, what's on your fishing trip bucket list?
I think the correct answer is to go kingfishing in the Kenai again.
That's an aspirational fishing trip. That is true.
Mine is not so much as a trip as prep for the trip. So I spent some time in my late 20s, early 30s thinking that I really wanted to learn how to time flies, and I put a valiant effort into it. And then I got work, then I got a job, and that sort of interfered with that. So my goal is to at some point have enough time and the eyesight to actually tie some flies so that I can go wherever I want to go fly fishing. So.
Awesome. Well, with that, I think we're at the end of our panel. Again, thank you to Western Caucus and the Kenai River Sport Fishing Association for allowing us to be here, and for our panelists.
Panels and important discussion that we had here today. We're happy to facilitate this along with the Kenai Sports Fishing Association. Looking forward to dinner with you all tonight and catching some silvers tomorrow. For those on the buses over to the hotels, they will begin boarding in about 5 to 7 minutes. You can linger for a few minutes. alternatives. And as well, make sure you get on the same bus and for those going back. With that, this concludes our policy panel for today. Look forward to this weekend. Thank you all.
Wow, we have smart panelists.
Thanks, Bill. It's lovely to be here.
Hi, Meryl.